In case you don't feel old yet, the iPhone 5C came out 9 years ago, being released all the way back in 2013, and was basically the iPhone 5 from the year before, but in a colourful plastic shell. But despite the 5C's fun, quirky nature, as well as being a perfectly reliable handset, it actually flopped sales-wise, since it was way overpriced for what it was, with the more premium 5S only costing a fraction more. And so, being one of the strangest and most interesting phones Apple has ever released, I thought it would be interesting to see how it stood the test of time in 2022, especially since I had to unfortunately use one as my main phone for a few weeks last year. It's a long story, I'll explain in a second. And so in this video, I'm going to be covering the design, display, cameras, performance, and battery life of the iPhone 5C from a 2022 perspective, as well as whether you could possibly still use one. So first off, spoiler alert, the iPhone 5C is really not a phone you should be using in 2022, and most definitely not a phone you should be going out and buying. With the hardware being 10 years old as of now, since it sports the iPhone 5's internals, time has passed by more aspects of this phone than not, from the older software it's stuck on, to the shocking battery life, to the mediocre performance. And if you're somehow still using one of these, you have my deepest sympathies, but at the same time, you also really need an upgrade, because you're missing out on a much better experience. But you probably heard me say a second ago that I actually had to use one of these for a while last year, and that was because I got scammed buying a phone on the notoriously not sketchy at all gumtree.com.au, in which the quote-unquote seller never sent me the phone, and I'd already sold my previous 12 mini, so I unfortunately had nothing else to use. And so my experience with the 5C in the modern day should make the information in this video a bit more accurate. But with that being said, let's kick off this review, like always, with the design. In terms of design, the iPhone 5C is made of plastic and is quite fun, colourful, and dare I say, cute. The plastic is smooth and glossy, and it's got a strangely satisfying feel to it, as well as being very grippy to hold. And since it's only 5 inches in height, it's very snug in the hand. In fact, even Apple themselves said in their commercial that the iPhone 5C was quote-unquote unapologetically plastic. And they were right. There was no need to apologize, because they did a solid job in making it feel as premium as it does. Of course though, the plastic is going to scratch more easily than metal, plus some people thought that it went against Apple's image of being a premium brand, but each to their own, I guess. Now, as typical for iPhones of this era, we get the chunky bezels on the front along with the non-Touch ID home button, and this was actually the last iPhone not to have Touch ID, since the flagship at the time 5S did, and so they had to give that cutting edge feature to the more premium device to help separate the two. But this hasn't aged well, and so you'll have to put in your passcode every single time you want to use it, which was a little annoying. But by the end of my use period, not to flex or anything, but I had a lightning fast muscle memory to do it. Although one benefit of this design, and pretty much all phones from this era, is that they all have headphone jacks at the bottom, which I'm sure a lot of people with wired headphones will appreciate, since it's been killed off on like 90% of modern phones. Now, when it comes to the display, the one on here is actually still pretty decent, and I don't just mean decent for a 9-year-old smartphone, I mean decent by 2022 standards. It's Retina, and is actually very sharp, and you can't see any individual pixels, and this is due to its resolution of 1136 by 640 and pixel density of 326 pixels per inch, and while it is only 720p and LCD, its size of 4 inches shrinks down the image, therefore giving the illusion of a higher definition picture. Although the 4 inches of screen real estate is going to be a blast from the past by today's standards of enormous phone screens, which means it isn't really ideal for consuming content on. But the phone is very one-handed friendly, and you can reach all 4 corners of the display with one thumb. Bottom line though, everything is still going to look crispy and sharp on here, whether you're reading an article, watching a video, or scrolling through social media. Now, in terms of the cameras, the iPhone 5C sports a single 8 megapixel rear lens and a whole 1.2 megapixels of selfie camera. And surprise surprise, photos on here don't hold up particularly well 9 years later, well, actually 10 years, since again it shares the same setup as the iPhone 5. But taking a step back, the cameras aren't absolutely horrible, and if you're outside with a decent amount of light, they can take some surprisingly half-stunning shots, although colors can get washed out easily, and most of the time they're going to have a sort of flat tone to them, as in not being very vibrant, plus the exposure control isn't great. Some areas are going to be overexposed, while others won't be exposed enough, and plus you're going to want to stay away from indoor conditions or places with below average lighting, because you're just going to end up with a blurry mess. Oh, and there's also no optical image stabilization, so it's going to be a lot harder than normal to get a perfectly still shot. But generally speaking, it holds up alright for its age. I mean, I was stuck with the 5C's camera while I was using it as my main phone, and it was doable, but at the same time, you know, it's highly not recommended unless you absolutely have to. The selfie camera, on the other hand though, is pretty disastrous no matter what your situation is, being only 1.2 megapixels, and I'll let these samples speak for themselves. You know, it'll definitely be a challenge trying to take something at least half half decent. It's just not a fun time, and not a camera you want to be using. Now as for video, the 5C can shoot at up to 1080p at 30 frames per second, and similar to the photos, the video is actually okay if you've got good enough lighting, but it's going to have those same issues of bad exposure and sometimes mediocre colors, especially since again, it lacks optical image stabilization, so it's not going to be easy to get steady footage if you're used to filming with a more recent device. But I mean, you can see things clearly enough, and if you absolutely have to for whatever reason, it will get the job done. Barely. Moving on to the performance, as expected, the 5C sports the exact same internals as the iPhone 5, the Apple A6 chipset and 1GB of RAM, and performance on this phone only just misses the territory of being unusable, as light tasks are bearable to do, but you've got no chance of doing anything remotely heavy on here without it crashing. This just isn't a fast phone anymore like it was back in 2013, and it will require quite a bit of patience. For the most part though, it can handle basic activity like web browsing, music, and a few games with reasonable speeds, and if you've got a good temper and are willing to cut it some slack for the outdated specs, then it's usable by all means. It's just not smooth and snappy and lightning fast anymore. And like I said, if you try to run anything heavy like Pixel Gun 3D or Roblox, it's just not going to happen. End of story. In my case of using it for a few weeks, it was kind of like the frog in the boiling water scenario. At the start, living with this performance wasn't awful, I could grin and bear it, but it slowly but surely got the better of my patience, and by the end, I never wanted to see another 5C in my entire life. But I actually found that if you turn off the Wi-Fi while playing games on here, they actually run much better, since it doesn't have to use up like half of its processing power to run the in-game ads, therefore giving you a much smoother experience, if for some reason you find yourself gaming on the 5C. Not a very common scenario. Now battery life on here is probably the 5C's weakest aspect. For starters, the battery isn't even that big to begin with, coming in at 1507 mAh, and plus the batteries inside most of these old 5Cs have most likely degraded beyond usable over the years, and getting it to last a full day with even light to moderate use can't be done in most cases. Personally, I mainly used it to hotspot my laptop, which might be why it would barely last half the day, so I had to bring a charger with me to school, but like even on weekends when I was at home, it still didn't get more than around a couple of hours of screen on time. But one exception to the rule is that if I was just streaming music to my headphones, the battery drained incredibly slowly, and I'm talking it lasting multiple hours, so there's that. If you're some kind of iPhone 5C superfan, you could replace the battery and get maybe, what, a couple of more hours out of a charge? But no matter what, it's just not going to last that long. In terms of software, the iPhone 5C can run up to iOS 10.3.3, and it hasn't received any updates since 2017. Now this puts quite a few boundaries on the 5C's functionality, meaning that you'll definitely run into some trouble trying to download some apps that require more recent software versions. For example, I know that YouTube, which is an app that like 99% of people use, dropped support for iOS 10 like a month ago, so you can't actually use the app anymore. You'll have to use the mobile web version, which is a lot clunkier by comparison. But with other apps, you can still download the last compatible version, like Instagram, which is still relatively up to date, and on that note, you can actually get the latest version of TikTok, so there's that. But as seen with YouTube, this won't last forever, and as time goes on, less apps will be compatible with the 5C as it becomes more of a relic of the past. So enjoy it while you can. And so, to conclude my 2022 review of the iPhone 5C, I think I can safely say that this device's life, in terms of daily usability at least, is pretty much over. Of course, you can still do the basics like calling, web browsing, YouTube, social media, or streaming music, but if you're somehow using this device as your main driver, and you're wondering if you should upgrade, well, please go do that, as that would make myself and you very happy. And if you're thinking of buying one, please put your money towards something better, because trust me, there are options. Even though you can get a 5C for like $70 on Gumtree, the first generation iPhone SE can be bought for as little as 100 Australian dollars, which has much better performance, the latest software, at least until this September, and upgraded cameras. So trust me when I say that the 5C might be even worse value than it was back in 2013, which is saying something. If you have a 5C lying around, gathering dust, it might be fun to play around with if that interests you, or you could give it to a kid maybe, or even use it for something like an Apple TV remote. But at the end of the day, the iPhone 5C is one of the most bizarre devices Apple has ever released, and while it was a pretty good phone back in its day, although overpriced, its age definitely shows now. But hey, at least it was fun with its wide array of colours, of which blue is the best, and I will defend that opinion until the end of my days. And so that's my review of the iPhone 5C from a 2022 perspective. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, please make sure you drop me a like and subscribe to TechSpree for more reviews, insights, and the occasional unboxing. Thank you so much for watching. This is Tom with TechSpree, and I'll see you as always next time.